Welcome to this session titled Ransomware, Attackers versus Defenders. Ransomware remains a key threat to organizations around the world. Defending from this threat is a key priority for many cybersecurity professionals. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll take a closer look at the typical tools, techniques, and procedures used by attackers by examining a real-life ransomware incident in detail, where Unit 42 performed the incident response and investigation, and Intel 471 provided the outside-in view using its tracking of the cyber underground. But before we get stuck in, let's do a brief round of introductions.
Thanks, Moritz. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Inchliff. I'm a threat intelligence analyst with Unit 42, which is part of Palo Alto Networks. Day-to-day job for me is threat research, malware analysis, supporting incident response cases, and generally tracking threats and threat actors.
And my name is Moritz Lucas, and my current role is Director of Product Marketing at Intel 471. Now, before moving over to product marketing, I spent more than 10 years leading cyber threat intelligence teams, analyzing cyber underground business models, and analyzing the links between cyber criminals and nation-state actors. Introductions out of the way allow us to tell you a little bit about Intel 471 and Unit 42 to explain our different vantage points when observing ransomware attacks. At Intel 471, we're a cyber threat intelligence company collecting intelligence in what we call the cyber underground, the underground ecosystem on the internet where actors buy, sell, plan, and discuss a variety of products, services, and tools which come together to create the threats that our customers are trying to mitigate. We focus on two main areas: adversary intelligence, looking at actor communications on forums, instant messaging services, etc., and malware intelligence, which is focused on the tools those same actors are using. We believe in a boots-on-the-ground model. Our research team is dotted around the globe because to truly be able to blend into the background and gain access to the most closed-off parts of the underground, our researchers must be located close to the actor ecosystems that they are tracking, so that they are truly able to pass off as a local because they have all the relevant and recent local cultural knowledge. We turn the intelligence we collect into solutions that help mitigate risk around a variety of topics: security operations, risk and compliance, system integrity, identity and access management, third-party risk, and fraud protection, to name but a few.
Yeah, from the Unit 42 side, the team's been running for about 10 years now, so they're built from the ground up within Palo Alto Networks to support the company and the products and services that we deliver to protect customers. There's over about 200 researchers at the moment that do various different things, including the typical activities like reverse engineering, malware analysis, vulnerability research, and we do things like proactive services as well. So tabletop exercises, pen testing, those kind of things. In terms of telemetry, of all the customers we have over 85,000 that send us and actively share with us telemetry from endpoint, network, cloud, and so on. And that gives us a lot more context and information to go along with the threats that we see. So we can often see where the threats are targeting and how they're operating. As I mentioned, we do incident response as well. So it's a good relationship where our threat intelligence empowers the people on the front line engaging with clients during their incidents. And what they're seeing on those front lines is often what's enriching our threat intelligence data as well. We do a lot of have a lot of partnerships and do a lot of sharing with organizations outside of Unit 42 and Palo Alto Networks, so law enforcement, certs and NCSCs, and various other organizations that will take and utilize our data.
So one of the goals of this webinar today is to show you the key role played by threat actors who steal stolen credentials and access to potential ransomware victims. Although their tactics may seem unsophisticated at first glance, they play a key role in enabling large ransomware attacks.
So another goal, we're going to cover a couple of case studies from Unit 42 today. And so you'll see through that some typical TTPs or tactics, techniques, procedures that threat actors are using to deploy ransomware. For the most part, they are very similar between all the different ransomware strains that we see, but we'll highlight some of those today.
And finally, we'll show you how threat sharing between organizations and using multiple sources of intelligence can enhance understanding of threats, which is one of the reasons why today's webinar is a duo presentation between Intel 471 and Unit 42. But first, let's look at some of the trends in ransomware, focusing on the fourth quarter of 2022, the last full quarter for which we have data.
Yeah, and from Unit 42, we released a incident response report in 2022. I think this was kind of mid to late last year, and covered some of the threats and the incidents that we responded to for the, I think it was 6 to 9 months prior to that report. So it's in the past, but it shows the trends of what we saw at the time, which was the majority of cases we responded to were ransomware, only by a small amount compared to business email compromise. But needless to say, it married to other vendors and open source reporting about the same, that ransomware was at the time a very prevalent threat. In terms of the families, and again, this is just for the incident response report that we published, so there are lots of other variants and names to consider here, but at the time, these were the top families, and Hive, which is the one we're going to focus on today, was in third position at that time, so quite a prevalent threat. In terms of initial access that we saw in our reports, about 50%, almost half of the intrusions were through software vulnerabilities. The majority of those were network-based and internet-facing, so those are incredibly easy to scan for and exploit using often open source code. So we see a huge amount of ransomware compromises that were precursor by software vulnerability. What we're going to focus on today is where that red arrow is, which is a relatively small wedge of the pie, and that is previously compromised credentials, so leaked or stolen credentials that were used by the threat actors to enter the network looking like a legitimate employee and then perform the attack.
Yes, our data, on which were the most prominent ransomware strains, closely matches what Alex just showed, so I won't duplicate it here. Instead, I wanted to draw your attention to these two graphs. The first one shows, on the left, that breaches and ransomware attacks are a global phenomenon. We publish monthly reports on the breaches we see evidence of in the underground and break them out both by country and industry. The regional graphic here shows you that these incidents impact North America, Europe, and Asia, as well as other regions of the world. The other graph highlights that there is a constant stream of new ransomware as a service offerings appearing. In one quarter, as many as 1/3 of all ransomware strains are less than 3 months old. The incidents that we will be covering in this webinar are around the Hive Ransomware as a service. And as some of you may know, Hive was the subject of a takedown operation by law enforcement in January of this year and has not been seen since. However, seeing this graph, it will come as no surprise that other offerings have since filled the void left by Hive. Now, to help understand how ransomware attacks work, let's first take a look at what the cyber underground is actually like. And let's clear up one misconception straight away. The underground is not like an iceberg, and the term deep and dark web is misleading and unhelpful when it comes to trying to understand what we call the cyber underground. The reason for that is very fundamental for our understanding of threats. Most of the threats we are faced with today are not the work of a single actor or even a single group of actors, but rather the work of different groups working together in some way, where each member benefits from being a small part of a bigger whole. We can think of them as chains or cycles, business processes, economic value chains. The key part is that they are made up of different participants, all working together in some way. And a participant can be a member of multiple chains at the same time, much like a business has multiple customers or produces different products and services for different markets. And that is a much better and more accurate way of thinking about the underground as a marketplace. It is limited in size and structures. The actors that inhabit it create that structure. They do this because they are always looking for new actors to group or partner with, as a supplier or as a customer. And by creating this structure, it makes it easier for others to find you, or for them to know that you are interested in looking or or looking for something. And the structure means that you know where to go if you want to plan or discuss a particular topic. So like a marketplace, the underground has specific areas focusing on specific subjects. Because it is limited in size and fairly structured, at Intel 471, we can map out that structure. We can identify and track the top tier actors in this environment and keep tabs on what they are up to. One of the most prevalent threats for the past few years has been ransomware. But the ransomware software, or ransomware as a service, is actually just one component in a typical ransomware attack. So let's take a closer look at the various stages and actors involved in a typical ransomware attack. Now, ransomware, or ransomware as a service, is actually the final step in a process which usually starts much earlier. So let's take a look at the actors involved in a ransomware attack and focus on their activities. The first actor is someone who gains the initial access, so the access broker. Next, we have the affiliate, the ransomware as a service, or RAS, and finally, our victim. Now, the job of the access broker is to provide the initial access to networks. This can be any network, and quite often access brokers try and get access to as many networks as they can, and then try to sell that access to their partners or in the cyber underground. Their activity is actually rarely targeted. Their aim is to try and get access to anything and everything. It is the affiliate's job to take that initial access and turn it into a full-blown ransomware attack. Key activities are lateral movement, exfiltrating data, and deploying the ransomware. The ransomware as a service operators provide the actual ransomware software and the infrastructure supporting it, as well as helping pressure the victim into actually paying the ransom. So we have access, lateral movement, and exfiltration, and then the ransomware. And if all goes according to plan, the victim pays the ransom and everyone gets their share. Now, if you look at this sequence, two things stand out. The attack actually starts long before the ransomware is deployed, and the biggest impact, the exfiltration of valuable data, actually also occurs before the ransomware is deployed. So to prevent this type of attack, it is not enough to just focus on the ransomware, but also and specifically on the earlier stages, such as the relationships between access brokers and affiliates, for instance. So let's take a closer look at access brokers and their TTPs. Initial access brokers, or IABs, play a key role in enabling ransomware attacks. Their activities also precede a ransomware attack, so it makes sense to focus on their TTPs. There are actually a lot of initial access brokers in the underground, as there is a lot of demand for their services. Once again, their efforts are not targeted. Their aim is to get access to as much as they can. The ransomware affiliates will then choose the target they want to focus on from that larger set of available victims. Their favorite ways of gaining access are one of using compromised credentials, either by stealing them or brute forcing them, exploiting vulnerabilities, or dropping malware through phishing campaigns. They usually drop so-called remote access Trojans, giving them full control over that endpoint. One of the recent developments we've seen is that access brokers are now trying to focus on gaining access to one organization or one victim that in turn will give them access to many others. So for instance, focusing on gaining access to service or infrastructure providers. There is a whole category of malware dedicated to stealing credentials, the so-called info stealers. They're called info stealers because they steal much more than just usernames and passwords, but also lots of data and information about the victim and their endpoint. Although seen as a simple threat by some, the truth is that corporate machines and corporate credentials end up in these data sets with alarming regularity. And the other information stolen besides credentials allows actors to comb through these data sets to find and pick out the corporate endpoints and credentials they captured, the golden nuggets for ransomware attacks. Info stealers are spread in a variety of ways, but I want to give a special mention to cracks and keygens. Our research indicates that almost every single crack or keygen that you can use to kind of unlock software without paying for it on the internet today has a sting in the tail in the form of an info stealer. Now, besides using stolen credentials, another favorite tactic is to simply brute force a password. Brute forcing makes use of bad password habits, choosing easy to guess or well-known passwords or reusing passwords. Actors compile lists of possible username and password combinations by using lists of actual compromised passwords or by going through all possible permutations, dictionaries, etc. These are called combo lists and are then sold in the underground. Access brokers can use special software such as Sentry MBA or All Combine to try all these different combinations on a particular target to see if any fit. Now, we've researched how long it takes from an initial access broker offering access to an organization for sale on the underground to that organization suffering a ransomware incident. Now, to kind of qualify this, we could only do this research by looking at instances where the access was first offered for sale in the underground. If the access broker sold the access directly to a ransomware affiliate, there would have been no initial offer, so there is no data point. But for those where we could track because they were offered in the underground, depending on the actor, the period between the initial offer by an access broker and a ransomware incident occurring was from 32 to 110 days. This actually means that monitoring of access broker offerings to see if either yourself or key third parties are mentioned is a good approach, as there is still time to prevent the bigger impact from occurring once you see that offer being made in the underground. Interestingly, we also saw one instance of this happening in reverse, an actor selling SQL injection vulnerabilities to organizations after that organization had been the victim of a ransomware attack. The white paper on the right goes into more details and is available on our website.
Thanks for that, Moritz. Great intro into the underground and all the capabilities that it offers for cyber criminals. So now we're going to talk about a Hive ransomware case that Unit 42 responded to. We were called in to help with this incident for a client that was headquartered in Lithuania. This was kind of late 2021, but the information I'll share is still relevant today. The organization had a global presence with several European branches that were also affected in the attack. What was of interest was that most of the clients' IT infrastructure and development functions were also based in Lithuania, and crucially, as was the attacker's infrastructure. For some reason, the Hive Ransomware group, or at least a set of affiliates that used Hive Ransomware, favored the Cherry servers bulletproof hosting facility in Lithuania. Okay, trying to progress the slide. Here we go. So in terms of the attack, starting at the top left-hand corner of the slide, we've got the threat actors. There were two distinct attack chains. The first one was that threat actors connected straight into unfortunately, a Palo Alto Networks global protect VPN, but this was with valid credentials, and there were no multi-factor authentication configurations on the VPN. So effectively, the threat actors looked exactly like a valid employee of the organization. So there's not a lot you can do about that. Once they were in the network, within about an hour or so, they'd enumerated the Active Directory servers and systems to gather more credentials, and they'd also deployed and used the zero logon vulnerability against the Active Directory servers to gain privileged access, so administrative controls. About 12 hours later, we see the second flow continuing, and that was about, as I said, about 12 hours later, so possibly trying to avoid the typical office hours, and maybe avoid being, doing anything suspicious while people are in the office. But they connect in with valid credentials, and then they do a couple of different things in parallel. One is further attacks against Active Directory and other systems to gain more accounts and basically do reconnaissance on the network in order to find the business critical servers and data and start exfilling that to one of their servers in Cherry Servers ISP. In parallel, they're deploying other tools. So they use Cobalt Strike, which is pretty typical of this set of affiliates, and also another backdoor, a secondary one called System BC, which is a Russian language, fairly primitive backdoor Trojan, but it gives them another access point in should those credentials get changed or multi-factor get used. Within about an hour of that activity, they were deploying ransomware using PSExec and WMI to all the remote hosts they could find. And then they logged off, I think about 24 hours after their very first initial login. leaving behind 152 encrypted systems and ransom notes and instructions on what to do. Something to note of interest was this desktop host name, the I4RFG host name. We saw that used a lot with this particular affiliate group, so it became like an indicator of compromise for us, and we were able to track it using things like VPN logs and firewall information and other stuff. And we actually saw this threat actor appearing in multiple incidents that we responded to regarding Hive, but also in our managed threat hunting customers. So those are customers where Unit 42 actually hunts through their data looking for threats in their network. We saw this actively trying to get into a couple of customers that we've got, and we saw this hostname being used as the initial access point with those credentials. And then after they've got Cobalt Strike and so on deployed, they tend to move on to that as an access point as opposed to the credentials. It's not often that you can see the root cause of the attack, but we, through our analysis, found that there was a personal laptop that an employee was using for some of their work activities to connect to the corporate network. And we were allowed to do forensic analysis on that. And it showed that about almost 2 weeks to the day prior to the ransomware incident, there was another malicious or malware incident that we looked at. So the employee had done a Google search for some kind of cracking activation tool. And to Moritz's point earlier, there are lots of tools that can be downloaded that often have a sting in the tail. They have these password cracking tools. In this case, the employee was redirected through a couple of different URLs, some of which were a bit dodgy, and ended up with a RAR file being downloaded, which was password protected, so it avoids AV scanning. And it has a password in the file name, which is awfully convenient. The employee launched it, and credentials were stolen. In this case, the client's IT team confirmed that the user's personal device had the Chrome profile synchronized to their corporate Chrome profile, which is how it led to some corporate credentials being pinched. So in terms of the timeline, we had this initial victim kind of late 21. We did the incident response engagement. We also met with the Lithuanian CERT, the law enforcement locally, and a university who'd been a victim of a similar attack to gather more information. And eventually, with the help of law enforcement, we managed to seize the Cobalt Strike servers, which was great. We disrupted some of the activity for that threat actor, but we have seen within weeks of doing that, they'd spun up a new Cobalt Strike server and they were active again. So it was a minor disruption, to be honest. Once we had the servers and the client's data was on there, we had the rights to do forensics on there. So we did analysis of the team server, and that gave us 30 odd additional victims across multiple countries and sectors that had been hit by the same affiliate. Very similar TTPs throughout, and we were able to share a lot of that with law enforcement. It also indicated to us that there were victims that were previous to the original victim that we did incident response for, and some other victims in the future that we continue to do work for. The one thing that helped with our case at the time was that we managed to reduce the ransomware payment from, I think it was over $1 million to $100,000. Because the actors kept claiming they couldn't access the data anymore. We were demanding proof that they had the data before we paid them. And we knew that the reason they couldn't access the data was that we had the servers that they were using. And ultimately that led to a huge reduction in ransomware costs, which was great for our client.
Thanks, Alex. So let's take a closer look at Hive. The first time we observed the name Hive mentioned was in May 2021, when the actor Nullroute discussed a new affiliate program the actor was launching. It turns out that Nullroute was Hive's developer. Another prominent actor associated with Hive is the actor Partner, who helped recruit affiliates to the program, with a strong preference for affiliates who were able to provide their own network access, either directly or indirectly through access brokers that they dealt with. Affiliates got 80% of any ransom paid, with Partner both providing the ransomware build they deployed on victim networks, also handling the negotiations with victims. Another actor who was involved with Hive was the actor Leopold787, on the left in the diagram, who offers a crypting service in the underground for Cobalt Strike payloads, which are often used by Hive affiliates. Now, after the first samples of Hive appeared in the wild in June of 2021, it gained popularity and regularly featured in the top 3 of most active ransomware as a service offerings in 2022. This was due in part to the service picking up many former Conti affiliates when that ransomware as a service shut down. Another factor was Hive's habit of maintaining close relationships with initial access brokers, a good way to ensure a steady supply of attractive targets to attack. Initially, when it first appeared, Hive was focused on the health sector, but over time they expanded to other sectors as well. Now, in January of 2023, an international law enforcement operation involving more than 13 countries succeeded in taking down the Hive infrastructure, and the service has been quiet ever since. In the incident that we will be covering today, a malware sample was discovered which had some unique characteristics that can be explained by and also support our overview of the actors involved in the Hive ransomware as a service from 2 slides ago. The sample contained a particular path entry, which turns out to be rather unique. It was only ever seen in 3 other places, one of which is our reporting on the actor Leopoldo 787, who, as you'll hopefully remember, offered crypting services to Hive. So here you can see the group makeup shining through in the artifacts observed during an incident.
Thanks very much. So now in this section, we're going to try and cover how the defenders can utilize this information that we're talking about from incidents and IOCs and threat data, as well as the Intel 471 information around hacker forums and credentials for sale and everything else, to try and beat the attackers. You know, attackers versus defenders. So we're trying to empower the defenders with information that they can use to protect themselves. So this diagram just shows the picture that we're starting to build up of the Hive ransomware operators and the affiliates that are performing the attacks based using the ransomware as a service model. So we've got a few circles here that indicate a couple of incident response cases, as well as other information that we've managed to gather through pivoting and enriching. So when you have one attack and you can take a domain or some IP addresses or some files, some malware, you can start to do analysis on that and build out the picture of what other related objects out there could be down to the same threat actors or affiliates. And over on the right-hand side of this diagram, you can see data being pulled in from Intel 471, so samples that we've seen there that actually have relationships with samples we've seen in incident response cases. So the middle circle is where we're going to focus now, which is where we, as and when we build out this picture, Unit 42 does a kind of constant threat hunting across all the Palo Alto Networks telemetry that we have in order to try and find any customers or victims that we might want to reach out to or help with a compromise. So we found one particular victim, a customer of ours. I should say potential victim, because we saw lots of malicious activity, but there was never the final ransomware deployment that we expected to happen because of all the protection in place that was preventing the threat actors from fully deploying their activity. So we saw a customer of ours that had a threat actor in the network. They'd got into the Citrix system with valid credentials again, and there was no multi-factor again, which made it very easy for the attacker to get in. And they were using various suspicious scripts like PowerShell and Cobalt Strike tools and other things that they were downloading from that domain name and IP address in order to try and run tools and gather credentials and do everything that I explained in the previous incident that we responded to. At various points, we were detecting these as kind of medium or even high risk activities. We were detecting some of the malware they were using, like the zero logon exploit for domain takeover. And eventually, where we should have seen ransomware being deployed, we were successful in blocking that from happening. But in this particular case, because we knew the victim by name, we could start looking at other sources of data like Intel 471, not just for things like hashes and domain names and IP addresses, but actually for does Intel 471 have information about this particular victim organization? And in this case, they did. And it showed through various breach alert reports that they have that actually this particular victim had been a repeat victim of ransomware. So in July 2021, Hive had hit them and actually leaked data onto their leak site. We also saw Lockbit 2.0 in February 2022 doing the same and sharing the stolen data on their leak site. And in between, in September 2021, we saw a threat actor DLYA on the Exploit Cybercrime Forum offering unauthorized access to Citrix systems for various companies, several companies around the world. And so although we don't have conclusive proof that someone got the credentials from DLYA, the fact that we've seen Hive in, I think it was April 2022, trying to breach the network again with the valid access to Citrix, certainly shows like a high probability of that being the case.
So, what do we know about the actor DLYA who offered access for sale to the victim in this incident? Well, the actor joined the top-tier exploit.in forum in early 2021 and wrote a grand total of 8 posts between March and September. Most of these posts were on access offered for sale, suggesting the actor was an access broker. In one thread, the actor John Detmer offered the buy now price and later left a positive review, suggesting the actor bought the access and it worked, indicating that DLYA's offers were genuine. The actor also waded in on another thread where the actor Diego033 was asking for access for sale to warn potential sellers that Diego033 had allegedly scammed DLYA. Now, 8 posts may seem like very little, but what we believe, what is going on here is that actors quite often change their handles, so their online names. So we believe this is an existing and established access broker who just often changes their handle. And these 8 posts were when they were using the actor handle DLYA on exploit.in.
So in this final section, we're going to wrap up with, what can you do next? What can you start doing tomorrow to try and improve your security posture? So we're going to cover 3 things. Atoms, which are from Unit 42, which are actionable threat objects mitigations. These are sticks packages containing not only threat intelligence data like IOCs and things about threats like the ones we've described today, but also the TTPs using MITRE ATT&CK. So describing what behaviors and how the actors are actually doing what they're doing. And those atoms, the 6 packages, also include a third thing, which is the courses of action. So for Palo Alto Networks customers, there are some hints, if you like, best practices and mitigation techniques against those particular threats and behaviors. And finally, we're going to talk about automation, so that everything we've described today about these threats that are happening all the time. There's a lot of data around. Everyone knows there's a lot to do in terms of patching and everything else. So you've got to have some automation in place to try and scale and also be consistently repeatable in your processes. So we're going to talk about Palo Alto Networks XSOAR. Other SOAR platforms are available, but this one, like the others, offers a security operation and orchestration tool. And it allows you to consume the data from Unit 42, the atoms, as well as the MITRE ATT&CK information and indeed Intel 471 information in order to do automated things with that. So that could be automated threat hunting to look through your logs and your data for the threats like I showed earlier. But also it can help with automating searching for your organization's details against Intel 471 data in case there are useful things in there like possible lead credentials, Citrix weaknesses and things like that if you know could affect your organization, you can do something about it in an automated way.
Thank you. Now, in the analysis of the incident, you've seen Alex present an overview containing information and data collected from inside the perimeter of the victim, but augmented with an outside view provided by Intel 471's cyber threat intelligence. One of the ways Alex was able to do that is because our intelligence has an integration with Palo Alto's XOR platform to allow you to augment the telemetry being collected with intelligence, including high fidelity feeds of technical indicators, vulnerability intelligence, breach alerts, compromised credentials, as well as all of our intelligence reporting. These are invaluable, not only when responding to incidents, as we're doing in this webinar, but also in helping preventing incidents from occurring in the first place by helping protect your digital estate. Here's a quick screenshot of the integration in action. In this case, a feed of malware command and control servers. Now, any instance where an endpoint inside your perimeter would be seen connecting to one of these URLs would be a very strong indicator that that endpoint was infected with malware.
Thank you. I won't stay too long on this slide because I've already covered roughly what atoms are, but to give you a visual of the STIX package that I was talking about before, within this STIX structured threat intelligence exchange language or format, we encompass IOCs about the particular threat, so Hive Ransomware in this case, together with the TTP, so MITRE attack techniques being listed and described as to which ones are being used by the threat actors, together with courses of action at the moment for Palo Alto Networks products and services. And that's all wrapped up in a STIX package, which can be consumed by machine. So this is designed for machine-to-machine communication to share that information. Every time we release a blog on our website, we release an atom if there are technical indicators to be released as well. So if you read a blog as a human, you can get the technical indicators using a machine and do the automation. So if you go to our website, you look at atoms, you can choose your atom based on the adversary. So it could be an APT adversary, it could be ransomware, cybercrime, commodity, whatever the case. If you drill into it, you'll see, and again, for humans, this is the kind of human representation of that STIX package. You'll see the descriptions, the target industries, the countries we've seen it in, the tools or the malware being used, the indicators, and so on. And if you drill in further, you can see the MITRE attack techniques, which we believe are being used by the threat actor, all the tools in this particular attack. And if you go into one of these particular cells, so one of these techniques, you can see the IOCs that are associated with the threat. You can also see the courses of action for products and services and best practices that you can do to try and mitigate against the threat. And that STIX package, the one that we can view as a human here, can be consumed into things like Cortex XOR or other threat intelligence platforms, MISP, TAXI, and so on. So you can get that feed automatically into your systems.
Thank you, Alex. We're getting to the end of this presentation, and we wanted to finish up by giving you some homework, things you can start doing tomorrow to better protect yourself against breaches and ransomware attacks. They are multi-factor authentication with access brokers, info stealers, and combo lists. Static passwords just aren't good enough anymore. Also, use password managers to help people choose and use secure and unique passwords by making it easy to manage them. Consider using threat intelligence for the over-the-horizon view it gives you of threats and the threat landscape. Forewarned is forearmed. Working for a CTI company, I know you all think he would say that, wouldn't he? But it's still true nonetheless. Attackers love exposed RDP endpoints, and they are a challenge to secure. Therefore, ensure all RDP access is protected by an enterprise-grade VPN. If you don't know which one to choose, I'm sure Alex can help. Patch, 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 and patch again. The same old advice, even though we fully know how challenging it can be, as there is so much to patch and so little time to patch it in. Vulnerability intelligence can help you prioritize patching to make sure the stuff attackers will exploit gets patched in time. To help identify possible ways in for attackers, consider a credential and breach monitoring service to get notified of compromised credentials or breached third parties. Attack surface management solutions can help you find and track vulnerable systems on your own perimeter. And finally, everyone is always talking about the lack of qualified people in cybersecurity. So consider outsourcing if you don't have the time or the people for it. You don't have to monitor the cyber underground yourself. Intel 471 would be happy to do that for you. Likewise, Palo Alto can help you with their managed services, such as managed detection and response. And that brings us to the end of the webinar. From us at Intel 471, thank you for joining. And if you'd like to know more, please visit our website and consider subscribing to one or both of our Periscope reports or executive briefs containing weekly updates from the cyber underground. And we hope to see you on a future webinar.
And likewise, thank you from Unit 42, and lots of information on our website as well. So I hope you enjoyed the session.
And we've got a couple of minutes left. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions and answers. I see that there's a couple of questions, actually quite a lot of questions coming in the question box. If you have questions, by the way, just click the question mark icon on the right side of the screen, and you can put your questions in there. We'll try and answer as many as we can. Any that we don't get round to in the time remaining, any we don't get round to, we'll try and follow up with you offline. Let's see. Oh, here's to get us reaching back to the beginning of the deck, actually, with our first question. This question says, Hive was a popular ransomware strain, as we could see from the graphs, but it has now disappeared. So the question is, which ransomware or ransomware as a service is currently popular? It's a very good question. As a matter of fact, in the beginning, in the graphs that Alex showed, it wasn't just Hive. Conti was very popular at the time as well. But if you remember, that disappeared first. Hive picked up a lot of their affiliates, and that meant that Hive became popular. Currently, I think I looked at this just recently for the last month. The most popular one by far, by an order of double the number 2, is Lockbit. Lockbit 3.0 is currently the most popular, followed by Royal. And then we have Vice Society and Alf V in that kind of joint third. They both have an equal share, but those are the three most popular ones. And like Hive did before, many of the affiliates that you saw will have migrated to other ransomware as a service operations. And as a matter of fact, quite often we see affiliates being a member of multiple ransomware as a service offerings at the same time, because neither the disappearance of Hive nor Conti was actually unique and a first. They disappear and new ones pop up regularly. And I think the second question is a good one for you, Alex. This was talking about the incident. I've got a question. I think that's an interesting question. How were the attackers able to bypass the Palo Alto security products that you mentioned?
It is close to home, so I'll take that one. I was saying, as with the cases that I covered, I think the 2 cases I covered in the slides, but in fact multiple others that we did incident response for relating to these, what we believe is the same Hive affiliate group. They always used credentials for their initial access. So they weren't part of the 50% of cases where we saw software vulnerabilities being used for the initial access. They used credentials. And in the 2 cases I talked about in the slides, these were valid, stolen employee credentials, and because there was no multi-factor authentication, anyone with those credentials could log in and impersonate that employee. So in terms of bypassing Palo Alto, there was no, exploit or vulnerability that was being used to bypass. It was just purely credentials. So, rule of thumb is that, especially on VPN servers and anything externally facing, you should get multi-factor authentication installed so that employees have to validate every login that's done with their credentials to make sure it's them and not someone else.
Thank you. And I think we're coming up to time. So time for one more question. I think this one's an interesting one. What do you think is the best way to halt ransomware groups? I think the implication being we're talking about how to prevent yourselves from becoming victims of them, but how do we put a stop to the whole concept of ransomware groups? Well, it's a question we get often, and as I think the only real thing that works at the moment, and it does get results, are the law enforcement investigations. As a matter of fact, the reason that Hive disappeared was exactly because of one of those investigations. They are our best bet. They also do get results, but the issue is they take a while. I think I mentioned that no fewer than 13 countries were involved in the takedown operation against Hive, and that's not an unusually high number. That's quite often the type of the numbers that you see. So that makes them difficult. It's difficult to do all these requests, get everybody to involve, etc. And of course, the other downside is, although they take down infrastructure, and in some of the past cases there have been arrests made, quite often these are kind of lower tier actors in the whole ecosystem. The main players quite often reside either in Russia or in the occupied areas of Ukraine, as a matter of fact, the Donbass, for instance. And so they are outside the reach of law enforcement. But for now, to continuing along that path it's a hard slog, but it does get results. I think with that, I think that's all we have time for. Don't want to keep you too long. One thing I want to end with, if you are interested in more details about how to use cyber threat intelligence to prevent yourself from falling victims to ransomware attacks, be on the lookout. Next week, my colleague Dave Brooks will hold a use case webinar showing you how Intel 471 cyber threat intelligence can help you prevent ransomware attacks. And with that, we will bring this talk to a close. Thank you very much for joining us today.